Hello everyone, and a very good afternoon to you all. We're just waiting for other participants to join us. My name is Patrick Tigwell. I'm a general practice partner with Thomas Westcott, based at their Exeter and Tiverton offices. And as is getting to be the case, it's my privilege and honour to be your host for this afternoon's webinar. We've had a week that's generated perhaps more heat than light. We shan't really be dwelling on the comings and goings of government special advisors, but trips to castles, I think, are very much what we're about today, as leisure and tourism is the focus of this week's webinar. Now, to help me in this task, I'm delighted to welcome a great panel list of panelists for you. Sporting an indescribably, I don't know, what a sort of beard, the beard that's feared, is our head of leisure and tourism at Thomas Westcott, Stuart Carrington. Now, Stuart's one of my partner colleagues and heads up our Axminster office. And he'll be giving us 5 to 10 minutes in a little while on the effect on the leisure and tourism industry and government measures that have been brought in to try and help. After Stuart, we'll turn to Sarah House. Now, I'm delighted to welcome Sarah to the call. Sarah's a director at the Unity Holiday Resort, which is a family-owned business at Breen Sands in Somerset. I was reading her LinkedIn profile, 20 years hands-on experience within the business, a company director, obviously, and a specialist in HR and health and safety in all things leisure, from food and beverage, retail, golf, water park, and indoor soft play. So really just the kind of person I think we need to bring a bit more light than heat to proceedings today. I note from the website that their motto is bringing families together since 1946. So I'm sure she'll be bringing them together, but at a safe distance from other families, perhaps. Sarah will be providing invaluable advice really on her kind of journey, how her business has been affected, but really more importantly than that, perhaps how she thinks her business is going to sort of emerge from lockdown, given government advice. The phrase common sense has been used a lot, and I think that she might be using that again here. Just to say that Sarah has replaced Alan, who has double booked with a meeting with an MP, I believe, so he couldn't be with us, but Sarah is a more than ample substitute. And finally, and by no means least, we have, I'm delighted to welcome Robin Barker. So Robin is a consultant to tourism organisations at home and abroad. He's a director of Tourism Management Institute, the Tourism Alliance, Visit Devon, and Services for Tourism. And he also leads on the country's premier tourism awards scheme involving 500 plus tourism businesses, as well as the annual West Country Tourism Conference. So you can't get more sort of credentials than that in my mind. So we're delighted that Robin is on the call to sort of make sense of what the government are saying. As ever, behind the scenes, we have our head of marketing and Arsenal fan, Jamie, who's looking after the technology for today's webinar. The webinar is being recorded, and in the thank you message that Jamie will put out, he'll send that recording to you. So what's the plan this time? Well, first of all, I'm just going to give a very, very brief update on developments, but there is a bit of overlap there with Stuart, so I'll let him expand on that. Then it's to Stuart, then Sarah, then Robin, but there is the webinar is due to last for about an hour, so a little bit longer than normal, because we've had a lot of questions come in, and I'm sure you're going to have a lot of questions still. What you can do is, if you haven't yet submitted a question when you registered, there's a Q&A button down there, so put them on that. We can see them live and then answer them as we go along. Please post "anon" at the start of your question if you don't want to be named. And if you find you get to the end of the webinar and you still haven't asked your question, you still can at events@thomaswestcott, all one word, I would just put a caveat in here that we have had some quite detailed questions about individual circumstances that we can't possibly get to, digging down into the weeds on things in this webinar, but we will attend to every question either on the webinar or afterwards. And do remember that a lot of the questions might have the answer, well, we're waiting for government advice, and Robin can expand on that a little bit later. So just to start things off, the update, it's been another reasonably quiet week. I'll mention the discretionary fund very briefly. This is the fund that supplements the grants funding, the business rates grants funding that the government brought in, and it's for businesses that haven't hitherto been able to claim those rates grants. Just to say that local councils are now putting the claiming mechanisms on their websites, but there is a very fine sort of line of there's a window that's only for about 2 weeks, I believe. Maybe Stuart can expand on that. So do get your claim in quickly. In terms of the rates grants, they've been tremendously successful. As of the 26th of May, 9.9 billion has been paid out to over 800,000 business properties. The JRS, the Job Retention Scheme, has been equally successful, 8.4 million furloughed and 11.1 billion has been claimed so far with that. Now, again, Stuart will kind of expand on this a little bit. We are waiting for guidance from the Chancellor about the exact employer contribution post 1st of August, my apologies. So again, we'll be able to let you know that probably on next week's webinar, but possibly in a blog post before then. The bounce back loan and the CBILS have been very successful too. The bounce back especially, 14 billion lent with an 80% success rate. The CBILS loans, less so really, 7.25 billion lent with a 50% approval rate. So just a very broad brush approach to the developments this week. I think the main one though is that the footy seems to be recommencing on the 17th of June. Arsenal playing Man City behind closed doors. All I'll say to that is, well, both teams are used to that probably, aren't they? So anyway, enough football puns. I'll pass over to Stuart for his take on the leisure and tourism industry and the government reliefs available. So Stuart, over to you.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Patrick. I'm not actually appearing on the screen at the moment. It's on my screen. Is that a problem? But anyway, I'll assume everyone else can see me. So thank you, Patrick, and thank you to everyone else who's giving up their sunny Friday afternoon to listen to an accountant speak. It's a strange way to spend what could be a better day, but never mind. We live in strange times now. The first 10 weeks of this lockdown have been characterised by all of us trying to find proxies for the fun we normally fill our lives with. Typical examples from colleagues are baking, putting rainbows in windows, and dubious facial hair. Now this is actually a response to a discussion I had with Jamie, who's hidden his picture here, back when lockdown started. And it is about to go, but I thought I'd keep it for today. Anyway, the truth is that these are all very poor substitutes. What we're really missing is the ability to fill our time with things that we actually enjoy. And that's the sort of things which the tourism and leisure sector is there to provide. As a sector, tourism and leisure could, theoretically, in the short term, be treated as the very definition of non-essential. However, as the misery of lockdown has continued, the benefits of this industry have become much more apparent. We're undoubtedly essential for the nation's mental health, but also, especially in the Southwest, for the economic well-being of vast swathes of the country. Just think of all the people we know in our local communities who are involved in some respect in tourism and leisure. At last, the government are accepting those benefits and they're gradually moving towards a reopening of the economy. It's going to be gradual, it's going to be slow, and there's going to be lots and lots of social distancing, cleaning and regulations. And Sarah's, no doubt with her health and safety background, will probably touch on some of those later on. I'm sorry if you're not, Sarah. Anyway, this coming back to normal isn't going to be easy. And it's only going to be possible with the continued help of our various funding schemes. So my plan today is just to recap on the funding schemes that are in place, those ones which will hopefully provide help going forward, namely the furlough, the self-employed furlough, and the government-backed loans. Now, those government-backed loans include the tax deferrals, your VAT and your income tax in July, because those are just loans by any other name. You haven't got to go to a bank to get them, but you're still borrowing that money. I'm not going to talk a lot about the grants because they're pretty much old news now. The only caveat to that, though, is if you haven't qualified for one of these previous rates-based grants, then local authorities have a discretionary scheme that may be worth investigating. It's not for everybody. The maximum loan is up to £25,000. There are details on our website, and it's worth following that through quickly if you didn't qualify for one of these grants previously, because as Patrick said, they are time limited, and there is a small amount of, there is a fixed pot of money. Once it's all been claimed, that's it, there's no more. So if you don't get your claim in, your grant application quickly, you could miss out. So first then, the job retention scheme, the furlough. According to my Twitter feed, it's the most popular discussion anywhere in the country at the moment. So far, the scheme is such that the government are providing 80% of staff wages up to £2,500 a month. It's not perfect. There are some groups that are excluded. Not everyone's getting the help that perhaps they need. But it shouldn't be forgotten that for employers and employees, this scheme has been the biggest single help provided. It's kept people in work, it's kept their jobs in place, it's given people the ability to plan at least for a few weeks ahead. Now, as Patrick mentioned, we are expecting changes, and I had really hoped that Rishi Sunak would have come on this morning so I could have fed those into my presentation. It actually looks like he'll be starting within an hour and 3/4 of me finishing speaking, and you think, great, it could be that everything I say is meaningless, but that's just another Friday, isn't it? Anyway, current plans, as far as we know, are that from 1st of August, the cost of people being on furlough will start to be shared between the government and the employer. Now, current suggestions, and which nobody in the government has denied, are that employers will have to cover 20% of the cost of furlough from the 1st of August. Possibly also the employer's national insurance and the pension contributions as well. Now, 20% may not seem huge, but if, as many tourism businesses are likely to find out, a business's income is still depressed or non-existent, then that 20% cost may be significant. It may be unbearable, but in any case, it's going to have to be something that's planned for. It's no surprise that there are some surveys out in the last few days suggesting that 1 in 4 businesses are now considering redundancies. With notice periods and accrued holiday, there may not actually be much time left to take such action before the 1st of August if it's felt necessary. It's all about balancing costs and taking a view as to what the future may hold for your business and can you afford to cover staff going forwards. As to the changes that may be about to come, well, the I newspaper was this morning reporting that hospitality industries will be exempt from this 20% cost, at least to start with. Now, I don't know if that's correct, because the Financial Times is saying that every sector of the economy is going to be treated equally. Now, they both can't be right unless there's no 20% cost to anybody. It will be interesting to see what Rishi has to say later in the day. Now, for the self-employed, we have variation on the furlough scheme, the self-employed income support scheme. And that paid a proportion of business profits up to £2,500, depending on how well you've done over the previous 3 years. Again, it didn't provide complete coverage. There were some people who've lost significantly from this scheme, and some who've actually done quite well. Their business hadn't fallen by as much as they've been able to reclaim. But it has provided some funds to typically smaller businesses. Now, the concern is this is due to run out on Sunday. It was announced for 3 months, backdated to March. That comes to an end on the 31st of May. There has been no announcement whatsoever about what happens next. I'm assuming that it will be rolled up with a discussion on the furlough at Rishi Sunak's presentation this evening. I can't see, as a personal opinion, I cannot see the self-employment income support scheme continuing beyond the 1st of August. And I think if you're relying on that, you need to take plans as to what may happen at that point. Now, the final support mechanism available to businesses looking to reopen are the various loan schemes. We have our VAT deferral, our income tax deferral. There is no corporation tax deferral. And we have the CBILS loans, Coronavirus Business Interruption Loan Scheme. Very popular, very successful. And then we have the bounce back loans, much more relevant to smaller businesses. Now, these have all been discussed in previous webinars. Now, there's full details on our website. Please go on there if you think any of these may be relevant to you. So I'm not planning on talking about those schemes as such, but rather stressing the implications of loan schemes. Now, even though some of these schemes have little or no restrictions, anyone can apply for, anyone can just take advantage of the VAT deferral. Okay? But they may not have restrictions, but they're still all loans. One day they're going to have to be paid back. They're not free money. It therefore follows that before taking on such loans, you should consider if your business plan is such that they make sense. I'm spending a lot of time at the moment working through business plans with clients, just seeing what can be done, what can still be achieved, and where a loan might help. Key things to consider. Well, there's the likely demand. According to a survey that I've seen from one tourism group this morning, UK tourism is expecting to see high anticipated demand. But what they're saying is that whilst large numbers of people want to come to the UK on holiday from other parts of the UK, they're now looking at a later season. And it might be September or October, shorter winter breaks before people actually start to come back. You need to consider your ability to meet that demand. It's all well and good saying, I'm coming back, I'm starting my business up again, but your ability to meet that demand may be restricted by things such as the 2-metre rule. Now, I'm just trying to picture, I'm in a reasonable room at the moment, and I could quite readily fit 6 to 8 people in here around a table. If I've got to put those 2 metres apart, I can probably fit 2 people in this room. It's going to make a huge difference to the ability for businesses to operate if you can only have a quarter of the normal people. And then you shouldn't, when putting together a business plan, ever forget the downside, the risks of the unexpected. Now, with COVID-19, there's always the risk that we're going to get a second spike. After the pictures at Durdle Door this week with hordes of people walking down steps to a fairly mediocre beach, all sorts of comments have been made, including from my GP, about the risk of a further spike. Well, the government responded yesterday by saying that in the event of further spikes, they may go for localised lockdowns. So if you gear up to reopen your business, commit everything to trading from a set date, and 2 weeks later, there's another localised lockdown, that could cause massive problems. Any business plan needs to take account of the risks that may come with reopening. And I think our next speakers will be talking about these aspects in rather more detail. So I just say that when considering the way forward, yes, we have opportunities, but we mustn't forget the basics of business. Any business, not just tourism and leisure, and that's that income needs to exceed expenditure, and that cash flow management is key. Now, thank you for listening, and back to Patrick.
Yeah, thank you, Stuart. We've just had a query come in from Martin Hills here, and he's just, I think, slightly confused about one of your initial comments about, you were talking about whether something was a grant or a loan, and you mentioned a finite pot, and he's just wondering.
Right, that one's a grant. Sorry, I just tripped over my words. That one's a grant, and it's a finite pot, and once it's gone, it's gone.
Yeah, that's it.
I would point out that scheme is particularly targeted at businesses that are, I think they term it property heavy. They have a significant amount of property costs in their business. Local authorities have full flexibility as to how they give those grants, but the 5 sectors that have been specifically identified are all those which have property base to them. If you don't have a property based business, you may find that it's very hard to access that funding.
Thank you, Stuart. If I could just run through, before we go to Sarah, run through a couple of queries that we've had when people registered. Our sort of holiday lets one, obviously, if you have furnished holiday lets, they need to be let out for a minimum number of weeks per year to qualify as a furnished holiday let. Is that requirement, still going to carry on?
There is nothing has been published to say that restriction won't continue. Now, this is the restriction that requires to be qualifying as a furnished holiday let to have, it must be available to let for 210 days and actually let for 105 days. Now, I've seen nothing to say that restriction has been removed. However, within the existing legislation, there's something that they term a period of grace. And if you fail to meet it in 1 year, as long as you meet some requirements in the following year, it's deemed that you met it. Now, those requirements require you to continue to let the property, and you must be able to, it doesn't say demonstrate, but I think you need to be able to demonstrate that you had a genuine intention to meet the rules if possible. No, so I think this summer, if you fail to hit the requirements, you're okay, as long as you achieve them next year. And if you fail next year, despite trying, it is possible to extend this period of grace to a 3rd year. So it shouldn't be a problem.
Okay, thanks, Stuart. We've had a few queries along the same kind of theme. This particular one is saying, we're a sports club and charity, in this case gymnastics, running from a commercially leased premises, but they've received no particular guidance for them themselves. They furloughed their staff, but they have no idea about when they're likely to be able to open. So they've got no income coming in. But then obviously with the furlough being amended from the 1st of August, what would we say to businesses like that, especially those in the leisure and tourism industry? Is there anything we can say at the moment?
It's very difficult. I'm hoping that gym type activity will get some guidance very soon. It's like, I think we've had a number of questions from gyms. Some of them are gymnasiums and some are gyms with equipment. Now, I do have some clients with gyms based around equipment who've been renting the equipment out for the last 12 weeks. As soon as they saw this coming, they contacted their regular customers and they've rented spinning bikes, etc., and people have put them in their garages. There are risks to that, but it's another means of maintaining an income stream. Short of looking at flexibility, there is no advice that we can really give prior to there being some guidance on reopening. As to the furloughing of staff, that will be a judgment that needs to be made once we know the cost share that's going to go to the employer. If the hospitality sector is excluded from this part of taking on a share of the cost, I don't think hospitality is referring to gyms, and I think they will be one of the businesses which may find this hardest to adjust to.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Stuart. I think we have got a few more questions that I could specifically ask you, but I think as time is moving on, I think I'd like to get or to ask Sarah to give us your presentation, Sarah. Actually, just a question that you've sort of answered. We have it's actually answered that one. No, if I come straight to you, and if you'd like to let us know what you've got to say. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. We will shed a tear this week with the weather, because Whitsun weather can sometimes be a bit unpredictable, and here we are sat here in the sun. It's very sad, but we are safe and we are planning and starting to reopen. So just a bit of information about my family's company, just to give you an idea of what we've got going on here. So we are a holiday resort, so we're a holiday resort Unity. We've got camping pitches, high fleet accommodation, and 600 privately owned static caravan owners who are desperate to visit their second holiday home. And then down at the leisure park, we've got an indoor and outdoor water park and gym. We've got an indoor soft play and the golf course. Breen Theme Park is on our premises, but it is a separately run business because it's a lease of land for us, if you like. So we have a permanent workforce of around 160 team members. That goes up to approximately 320. When all this started in March, really March and April would have been our huge influx of starters, and we managed to kind of stop recruitment a couple of weeks before the lockdown. So at that point we actually furloughed 190 workers, and we had around 12 of which were March starters that weren't part of the furlough scheme. Some of those were staff that were already living on site in accommodation, that had worked a couple of weeks in March, but because of when the RTI submission rules aren't part of furlough. So 99% of our staff are receiving furlough money, but we do have a small minority that aren't. And when you're considering reopening, that's one of our first considerations were people that weren't on furlough and what we could get them to do to help bring them back. So whilst we had all of our 190 on furlough, we had around 16 team members that we kept either working from home or on site. So we had our golf course to maintain. So we had 3 greenkeepers, socially distancing, working in isolation on the machinery on the golf course, and also cutting our grass on the main resort, as well as switching off our phone system for our bookings, which can get between sort of 400 to 800 calls a day to not accepting the inbound calls and going from phones to emails and calling them back. So luckily, because we've invested quite heavily in the last few years in technology, all of this remote working worked well from our reservations point of view. And then what we've been gradually been able to do, because if you like, we're a multitude of businesses in one, we've been able to start to get things back going. The downside of that is the guidance for certain areas of that has been quite slow coming and has been quite short notice. So our golf course is now back open. I think it's been back open now for 2 weeks under strict operations for COVID secure. So lots of webinars with England Golf and Bigger, which is one of the associations, to get that back up and running. And that is working really well. Whether because there's no children involved in it as well, because a lot of our businesses will have children involved, which is going to mean a lot different scenarios from supervision and communication. But generally, the golf members have been very good. They've looked at the signage, they've adhered to the rules, they've waited in the car park, so they're not too early for their tee slot, they've sanitised their hands. So the golf side of things is now working nicely, which is allowing us to focus on our sort of next areas. And I think what's hard for a lot of businesses is knowing what's meant to come next, because we've heard about the 1st of June, the middle of June and the 4th of July. And the 4th of July is, I think, what a lot of us is holding out for, but it's still a bit wishy-washy in terms of what that's going to be. For us, at the present time, we're seeing, hoping to get our caravan owners back in first. Now, whether that does happen before the 4th of July is a possibility, because it's something that the British Holiday Home and Park Association is lobbying towards. Because if we can get them in and they're self-distant within the separation distance within caravans, that's going to be a good taster to get some of the controls in place for them before we open for holiday bookings, which at the minute we are working towards the 4th of July. In terms of what else we're able to offer from that date, it's still quite hard to know. For Whitsun Week, we opened up our leisure park car park, our pay and display car park. We weren't going to open it, but unfortunately for us in Breen, whilst people are able to travel and visit the beach, which they want to do in this weather, all the beach car parks are closed, all the public toilets are closed, and the traffic and parking has got, and toileting arrangements has got to the point where it was unbearable driving into work, and lots of upset customers, not necessarily customers, but local residents. So we opened up our pay and display and toilets. And at the minute, there isn't, I couldn't find, having a trawl all around, all through the different guidance, there isn't much guidance for toilets, and we're all going to be wanting that, but there isn't, and that's probably why the council hasn't opened it. And Patrick mentioned at the start about our common sense approach. There is a lot of guidance, so you can take a sensible view on it, which we've nominated someone to work alongside myself just to purely look at the COVID control. So we've been to these toilets. They're accessed from outside. There's only one way in and one way out to the ladies and the gents, but it's just going in there and just looking at it sensibly, looking how people move around and how we can accommodate social distancing in terms of cubicle spacing, urinal sinks, and all of that. So we've got the toilets open, they're safe as they can be. We've got outside sanitizer point, we've got a marked queue line, so the person's got to come out before someone can go in. But it is heavily going to be relying on customer participation, if you like, and joining in and doing their part, as well as staff supervision and cleaning. But as things progress and more areas of the business open, there's no way our toilets are going to cope for the number of people that we're going to expect to get to the park. So we're now looking at potentially renting in toilets for the 6-week period, single cubicle toilets, so that we can space them out. They've got their own sink and sanitizer, because otherwise there could be very long waits for queues. So that just gives you a couple of ideas of the practical things we're looking at. In terms of a staffing point of view, what I found when we've got quite a lot of team members is communicating with them, because they are concerned about their job. Yes, they're getting the furlough. They weren't necessarily getting furlough to start with from our point of view, because we'd made some decisions in terms of not redundancies, but in terms of layoffs until the furlough scheme was announced. So we got them all onto the furlough scheme, but it's just been keeping them up to date. And also, most importantly, what's going to happen when they come back. So a couple of days ago, I made a video which we posted onto YouTube, but onto a way so that only people can view it with the link, about what they can expect when they come back to work. So it's just a good way to reassure them what we're putting in place. So from when they arrive, to car parking, to coming into the building, how things might look different, to sanitizing, how we're going to be doing that, if they've got a shielding letter, all of those types of things, and to give them some examples of what we've already done in some of the places that are open. Another thing we've done is our managers, because majority of our managers are furloughed, so we've got a WhatsApp group for them. So it's a good way to communicate to them in advance of us sending out any team member information. And then at the minute, we're literally going by area and to do a COVID risk assessment based on what area is opening first. So we've been fortunate, we've got the car park and the toilets open, and we've just started an ice cream takeaway service from our ice cream parlour, which traditionally would have been a walk-in takeaway, and we brought the counters to the door so the customers aren't coming in. And that's the approach you have to have. It's a very much think outside the box, the customer journey, and how you could do it differently. Bookings this week are now really starting to come in. So we've unfurloughed 2 reservations team members and a receptionist. Although our reception is closed, we're utilising that area. So straight away, that's 4 risk assessments in a week that, yes, we've been thinking about, but if you need to dedicate the time to start to get them underway, so that if your business needs it, so we identified that from the sheer amount of emails, social media inquiries, you need to be able to adapt your business, but you need to be able to do it quickly. So you can't be, in some instances, if it's a small business, you're that person doing everything, but you need to have allowed the time to be prepared, because you do have to think about the social distancing and how people move around a single corridor, and that's just before we've even got any customers on site. So that it is certainly a challenge. And the other thing that is a big challenge is sourcing products that you need. So your hand sanitizer, your gloves, aprons. So all of those things are at a cost. So if you haven't bought them now, you need to be hunting around, and don't buy what you see first of all. Obviously, you want to make sure your hand sanitizer's got your 60% or more alcohol, but you want to hunt around for prices, because prices are going through the roof. And also with masks, because there's a lot of, I think, unknown about whether staff should be wearing masks and things. And once you start reading into the guidance, it does all come clearer. So we're not calling them masks, we're calling them face coverings, and we are only insisting that they wear a face covering if the risk assessment means you've got to work with someone within 2 meters. But ideally, your whole risk assessment is to avoid that in the first place. So you're looking at what tasks are done from a staff point of view, and anything that needs to be done with another person, can it be done without breaching that 2 meter? And if once you've been through all those considerations, then you're down to looking at giving them a face covering and keeping them within that 2 meters for less than 15 minutes. So I'm sorry if I've gone a bit off target, or it's not what you want, or it is what you want. But if you fire across your questions, we can I can target it in a bit more direction. A couple of other things just to note when you are setting up your controls is to photograph them, because we all know what it's like with social media. We're getting asked every day, what's going to be open? Is it going to be safe? Is the swimming pool going to be open? Well, swimming pools, yes, there has starting to get a little bit of guidance through, and for gyms, but there's absolutely no date on those yet. And the thing with the swimming pool for us is swimming pools have a very high running cost, and there's the ability to run a swimming pool on a capacity which we don't know what that will be yet, and be able to cover the operational costs as well as run it safely. So if, for example, we can only run swimming pool on 20% capacity, is what we can actually offer them safely and it not be costing more money than it needs to.
Yeah, Sarah. I'd just like to kind of come in with a couple of questions that are more related to you, I think. We've had one that says, well, what about what are your thoughts on the changing of the bed linen and the guest rooms and this sort of thing? I mean, the questioner is saying, well, it could be considered hazardous waste potentially, but are you going to be doing anything different in terms of the, servicing a room ready for the next guest?
So what we're doing at the moment is our holiday accommodation comes with bedding, all grades of bedding. So our cleaning process is the beds are stripped before the cleaners enter. Our own staff strip the beds. So for that, they're going to be wearing disposable gloves and aprons, which are changed between each caravan, and the bedding then goes into a plastic bag that is then taken to the laundry. Now, some of you will outsource your laundry and some of you will do your laundry in-house. I think what it's important to identify when you're taking your bookings is obviously asking the obvious questions, but I know it does sound obvious, but it's easy to forget, is to make sure your guests are aware that they don't come if they've got COVID symptoms or any of the self-isolation requirements. And then also if they get symptoms on resort. If they get symptoms on resort and then you've asked them to go home, the general consensus on the guidance that I'm seeing at the minute is leave the accommodation for 24 hours if you can, to help reduce the risk of contamination before entering. And at that point then potentially we would at least offer face coverings to the cleaners as well.
Okay, because that was quite important, wasn't it? What happens if somebody does fall ill with COVID when they're at the resort? And what you're saying there as well, okay, they would have to leave immediately, but in terms of the effect on the room and everything, you would leave it for 24 hours, but then you'd sort of deep clean it with suitably attired cleaning staff, presumably. What point would you then, after that cleaning process, would you then kind of hire out that particular room or that particular facility? And do you think you would have to, if the guest has fallen ill, potentially they've used quite a few of the different facilities on site, how would you kind of cope with that from a practical view?
Well, I think there's two sort of folds to that. From the accommodation point of view, it's down to the chemicals that you're using, and you need to make sure you are using the correct chemicals in the first place. So your disinfectant, there is an EN standard, can't remember it off the top of my head, but you want to make sure that you are using the right chemical in the first place, and that the cleaners have a guide and a checklist to make sure that they're cleaning all elements. Certain providers, and I know we've got 2 on order, is we're looking at buying some fogging machines. So even once the accommodation's been cleaned, you fog it, but they are like gold dust, and I tried to order one since April and I've still got one on back order, but fogging is an option. But I think the key to this is training, and one thing I learned from setting up the ice cream parlour is you do your risk assessment. We've been communicating them online and doing electronic signature, but it's really important to do the training on site and also to review it if it isn't working. So it's all very well you documenting how you clean the accommodation, but is it actually being cleaned how you specify it to be? And if it is being cleaned how you specify it to be, and you've used the right chemicals, and there's no reason why that accommodation can't then be offered back out. In terms of the rest of the facilities, well, I guess this is where this track and trace is going to come in, but how you make it work on a holiday park when the guests would have already left, they're not necessarily going to know what people have been come in contact with. The guidance that we're seeing at the minute is to focus on the accommodation. But we are only expecting very limited of our facilities to be open in the summer, to be honest. I think around outside. things.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. There's a few more queries, but again, I think, I mean, Robin's been waiting very patiently here. So if I can ask you, Robin, to give us the benefit of your views, especially with the Sarah saying the wishy-washy of the 4th of July. I mean, so if you can take it on from that. Thank you.
I wish I could provide all of the answers, and thank you to Sarah. And I was taking copious notes there as well. And good to see that tourism award on the wall behind you, because in an ordinary year, that's what I and my business would be working on, the tourism awards. And my backdrop is Exmouth Beach, the less crowded end, where I hope to be heading a bit later this afternoon with my dog. The other end of the beach last week was large groups of largely youths not practicing social distancing and increasing the risk of health to us all, and actually the risk of reopening for us all. So all kinds of different stories out there, and lots of photographers trying to find some bad news stories by trying to grab a photo of groups too close to each other to shove on the front page of various media and so on. So a lot happening. My business is services for tourism, and as per intro, we run tourism awards and conference and lots of other things. And as Stuart went through, we've also been through the various loan schemes, and I have 2 members of my team off furloughed, one benefiting from self-employment benefit. There's no point in furloughing myself, so I applied for a bubble, the bounce back loan, which I have shoved in a relatively high interest account with a promise that I hope very much not to touch it, and that we can cash flow our way through this, but it's there as insurance, earning a little bit of money in the meantime. But that's what I have done. What I want to do was just under 3 headings. One, just talk about a few lessons from the past, because people talk about tourism as the glamour and all the fun, but the reality is tourism has had a disaster or another just about every year for the last 30, 40 years. This is the worst of them in very many ways, but tourism is used to working through crises, and there are lessons I think we can learn. Then talk about reopening or not, and then maybe a little bit into the long term in terms of what might be a result of all of that. So 3 headings, and firstly there, yes, lessons from past crises. We've been running weekly webinars for the last 2 months, talking through the coronavirus and awards and so on, and a few headers in that, which I think is still worth sharing. And my first tourism crisis, believe it or not, was Chernobyl, when nuclear explosion in Russia actually closed down tourism in Scotland and Wales because of contamination, as well as Eastern Europe, as well as causing all kinds of disasters and so on. So, reduction by fire in that, and there are lessons to be learned. And of course, since then, there's been foot and mouth and Dawlish and floods and rail strikes and war and terrorism, you name it. And there are lessons to be learned from all of those. And a couple of the common threads. Number one, of course, is my tip to everyone is to make sure you look after yourselves, your team, your staff, your customers, and importantly, your reputation. And I think we've seen a few businesses that certainly have not looked after their reputation over the last couple of months. Keep well updated. Our inboxes are probably filling with more emails than ever, and invitations to webinars, some good ones, and like this one, and some maybe less. And keeping updated on the constantly changing situation from government, your destination body, trade body, accountants, solicitors, Visit Britain, trade bodies, webinars, you name it, can be all-absorbing activity. And then 3 headings. Number 1, communicate. All businesses must continue to communicate with the customers, to reassure, to talk about cancellation policies, to show that the business is committed and will be back and is doing wonderful things. Communicating to staff, and communicating also to suppliers. Many tourism businesses won't be able to open quickly. Suppliers take 3 weeks to get ready. Well, if you're planning to reopen in 3 weeks, is your supply chain all there and ready and so on. So communicate and be positive. It can be hard, but if you are out there showing your commitment to customers, to the environment, to your staff, to the community, that ultimately is going to be a good message to be sharing. And being positive about the message, hence my lovely photo behind. I like sharing this when I'm on national webinars. It makes lots of people very jealous, and hopefully the demand will be there once it's safe for them to visit. And third heading there, be ready. We're all talking about a date for reopening. We don't really know when it's going to be. It may come sooner. And are we all ready? We've had time to be maybe honing our systems, and as I have, changing my accounting system. All great things to be doing at the moment. But now is a good time to be planning your marketing, your communications, your HR policies, ready to stand out from the crowd from when we're opening. Talking of opening, yes, to reopen, or maybe in the cases of some, to not. And Sarah's already been through a huge amount of the detail here. I'm in countless meetings every week, every day at the moment, and the tasks here are very much about number one, to research the criteria for your business to open. Sarah's already done that. It's not black and white though. There are new criteria coming out by the day. Some of them official and well thought through, some of them not. One thing it is not going to be is buying more hand sanitizer and that's all you have to do. It's more than that. There is a really comprehensive set of criteria from UK Hospitality, which talks through attractions and hotels. It goes to 77 pages. That is currently in draft. It's not agreed. It's part of a set of proposals gone to government. There is the Holiday Parks Association. They have a set. There is a work in progress at the moment for the self-catering sector and for the B&Bs. They are all draft proposals, all based on risk assessments for businesses to go through, which may or may not lead in about 2 weeks to government approving a set of guidelines and criteria that may lead to a national kite mark that will say to a business that it has self-assessed itself to be safe to open. And hopefully that will lead to confidence from customers, but also from host communities and your staff that somewhere is safe to reopen. There's also the quality and tourism, safe, clean and legal criteria, which one has to pay for, but that is actually up and running and proven at the moment and approved by environmental health officers. And that actually gives you a kite mark, which you could run with now, but it costs a little bit, but very much worth considering. So yes, you as a business, before you reopen, need to look at the criteria, the costs and the benefits of reopening. Sarah's already been through quite a few of those costs. But a bigger cost, of course, is looking at the capacities of the people you may be coming, having and visiting. If your costs of the perspex and staffing and so on are going to be 90% of what they usually are, but you can only run at 30% capacity, when you do your modeling, is it actually financially sensible to open, or is it not? And those are really big questions which every individual business needs to run through to seriously consider the options and then make a decision on whether it is sensible to do or not. And of course, in that is the date that reopening can happen. If it's 4th of July and potentially you can carry on till October, November, you might still have a good proportion of a season. If it's end of July and you've got to shut earlier, then a different dynamic comes in. And none of this, I'm afraid, is simple. And I wish I could tell you what all the criteria are, but all I can say is there are lots of sets of individual ones, and most of those trade bodies can share them with you. There are also some coming from people like Booking.com, and I hope there are no lawyers listening. Their sets of suggested criteria, in my view, don't meet anything like the kind of standard that will be needed to reassure environmental health authorities and so on. And of course, once you've made the decision, you then need to be in there training your staff, communicating with all of those various different groups about what it actually means. So a scary list, and I've probably depressed everyone. I'll do my little best to depress you a little bit less. If you look to the long term, if you study disasters, as my daughter does, she's just finished a degree in disaster management, so I want to employ her straight away. The concept after disasters is usually about build back better. And you see that right across the world after tsunamis and floods and so on. It's about, let's not go back to what it was before. Let's make sure that what comes after this is more resilient, better, stronger. We've got plenty to go through in the next months, years potentially. We've got to work through the health crises, potentially a huge consumer recession, which will lead to less consumer money out there. Probably no return to the long haul market, international market for quite a while. Consumer confidence, people worried about what is safe, what is social distancing, whether their communities are actually going to welcome these visitors back in the first instance. Lots of worries. Also, business finance. Many tourism businesses do spend consumer deposits during the winter on their winter investments, which mean it's gone before the visitors arrive. Is that actually going to be acceptable in the future? Will it need to be put into a trust fund and kept separate? Big questions. On the positive, and I'd like to enter a little bit positive, there is real evidence that the demand for quality domestic tourism is massive. There are people really clamoring to come and visit fantastic, safe destinations with good service and to enjoy the experiences that we offer. There is also evidence that we'll see an increase in that demand for businesses that buy local, that are ethical, that act responsibly, and buying good quality produce and so on. And that I think could be a positive that comes out of it. And we've also, of course, got to make it easy. We've got to have the really good digital systems so that people can book, can research everything as easily as possible. I think we'll see a huge growth in digital apps and so on. And at that point, hopefully I've ended on a little bit of a positive, and I hope that helped.
Yeah, thank you, Robin. I think you've raised some very good points here. A question that has come in, you possibly won't be able to answer, but do you know, obviously we're talking about England and the Southwest specifically really here, but the question has asked, well, do you think Wales will follow or be the same as England in opening up, you know, mobile homes in this case to residents? But from your kind of dealings with the various tourism authorities, do you think it is UK-wide, or is it just specific to England and potentially the Southwest?
Right now, it's each country for its own to a certain extent, but I did get a briefing yesterday that kite mark that is being worked on, which we are told is likely to be 2 weeks away, is going to be agreed between England, Scotland and Wales. But yeah, that requires lots of government departments to agree, and those countries to agree. So there are quite a few ifs in there, and I wish, along with everyone, that I could be more definitive.
Thank you. And a question we actually had last week, but I think we sort of saved it for this webinar. And the questioner is really saying, do you think that there will be reluctance of some visitors to attend tourist attractions and potentially the Southwest as a whole because they're frightened by the reports of COVID? I mean, you mentioned in your piece there that, you know, there's going to be a lot of demand for Southwest tourism in all its guises, but do you think that it would put people off?
Yes, there are portions of the marketplace that are nervous about travelling, but there are also, and there are different reactions amongst different demographies as well, and inevitably amongst different health groups. So the very older customers are probably a little bit nervous. The teenagers, on the whole, rather less nervous, but big variations in there. There are some people who will choose to stay at home. But it's a bit sad. There will be businesses that do not survive this. And there will be businesses that do not open this summer, and there will be some that very sadly will never reopen again. And I would expect that the capacity and the demand will probably just about even up, but that is gut feel and guesswork rather than based on any particular science at the moment. We had last Friday an online meeting between 20 tourism leaders and 9 Tory MPs in Devon, and much of the discussion there was about 2 meters versus 1 meter, and the fact that if we could move to 1 meter social distancing, then the proportion of tourism businesses in Devon that could safely reopen would double. The questioning to Boris Johnson last night, there was lots of questioning about that very topic. There wasn't a definitive yes or no, but it is still up there for grabs, and we have to keep lobbying and so on. And it came back to dependencies on whether these people were facing each other or sat with their backs to each other, and whether they have face coverings on and so on. So still lots of ifs and buts, talking to each other and helping each other like this is surely the most helpful thing I think we can all be doing.
Yes, thanks, Robin. Just a couple more queries. I know we're sort of over time, but I think it's important stuff, isn't it? And I think I'd like to bring Stuart in here, really, and something you said, Robin, about tourism businesses potentially reopening, but if they can only open at kind of 30%, 50% or whatever, some reduced capacity, it could be that the fixed costs and everything won't make that sort of viable. So, I mean, Stuart, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, you mentioned earlier about, talking about the loans and everything, and obviously income exceeding expenses. So, I mean, what would you say about a business thinking about reopening, but possibly on a reduced basis?
If you can do it on a reduced basis where you actually still have more income coming in than you're spending, then it makes sense. But I struggle with the idea of people opening businesses where they're not going to actually make any money. If you're in a worse position afterwards by opening, why open? And I know that's a very negative way of looking at it, but there is a limited amount of money out there at the moment, and people are going to have to make some choices. So
what do you think? I mean, I suppose I would say, well, they should talk to their accountant and do cash flows and business plans. Would you agree with that? Or
of course.
Do?
Why wouldn't I? Everyone should talk to their accountant all the time, Patrick. It's
even you.
But no, a business plan doesn't have to be a detailed exercise where you look at every item from a cash perspective. A lot of the time, you will know that you're going to your restaurant, you'll see that we can fit 20 covers in with 2 meters and 30 with 1 meter and 60 normally. Well, it's then a question of saying, right, well, how many staff do I need to operate that? And a business plan can actually be very, very simple and very straightforward. It just helps to have a chat with somebody else to see what you can do.
Okay. And Sarah, we've had a question. I'd just like to come to you. You mentioned about the sort of, I think it's specific queries we're having about in their circumstances, how they would ensure kind of cleanliness and this sort of thing. Communal areas, do you think that's toilet blocks, shower blocks and kitchens? They're saying, the questioner is saying, well, hand sanitizer outside of these facilities are regular cleaning, but what else would you recommend particularly? Is there anything else? Or you mentioned you're having the different cubicles and sort of one way in and this sort of thing. Is there anything else you'd like to mention?
No, I think it is all about putting yourself in the customer's shoes, not overdoing all your signage, but it's also looking at it early on once you've set it up and reassessing if you need to do something different. But I don't think our shower blocks will get open this summer. I think we're literally going to be on toilets or people holidaying with camp tourers or motorhomes with self-contained facilities initially.
Okay. And just another query about, we've had it on you may have answered one already, Sarah, on the chat there, but we've had it asked as well about the question of insurance. I don't know, Robin, you might want to sort of jump in here about what happens. Do you know about what happens if guest comes in to your facilities, Sarah, on the resort, becomes ill or whatever, has to go back? Do they get refunded by you? And if they do, who bears the cost of that, the guest or you yourself? Have you had experience of that yet, or?
We haven't yet, but we
No.
have had experience where, you know, people come and they have to leave because they're ill, whether it's a personal illness or someone from home. And we haven't, it's a good question, and I think we all need to look at it in our own businesses, what we would do now, because for sure it's going to come up. And I provisionally have put that, you know, we would consider giving a credit note, because at the end of the day, they haven't been able to come on holiday, they've cancelled, then they've had the unfortunate and ill and got to go. So my gut tells me we would give them a credit note, and I doubt they'll have any type of cover on insurance, but that could depend on when they took their policy out, whether it was pre-COVID or after.
Yeah. And Rob, kind of industry specific on this, or any guidance?
I mean, coming in there, the whole insurance side has been an absolute can of worms in the last few months. The reality is that most people going on a domestic holiday don't take out insurance for that domestic holiday. They book, and they kind of think, well, if we cancel, then someone will look after us. Well, some do, some don't. In parallel, we have lots of businesses who have taken out loss of business or pandemic insurance thinking that they were covered. Well, ultimately it comes back, and I had a very unhappy weekend a few weeks ago when the first time in my life I did actually read the small print on my business insurance, and actually discovered that it wasn't quite what I thought it was. And I suspect that, like me, lots of businesses don't. But there was pandemic insurance that covered all pandemics, and if the cover said that, then those businesses will, for in the main, I think, have been covered. There were some which covered named pandemics, and the coronavirus 19 was not a named pandemic before this, because no one knew it existed, and hence there is a major argument going on with the Financial Services Act and lobbying on cover there. And then there were those who just took out some general insurance and were not covered, and there were some who just lived in hope. So a real nightmare there, and lots of ongoing battles with insurance companies, businesses, consumers about where people's money has gone and where it is held and so on. And some of the online travel agents, the OTAs, have not behaved well in this regard.
Okay, thanks. I think wrap it up, but just one further question for you, Robin. Obviously, going forward, what is there a sort of definitive website or place where owners of leisure and tourism businesses can go to for the latest advice? I know you mentioned Visit England, Visit Britain, and this sort of thing, but is there one that you'd recommend above the others potentially, just so that they can keep a handle on things?
To be honest,
no.
Everyone, I think, should be in on their own trade body. So BHHPA if you're Holiday Park, UK Hospitality, British Pub, Beer and Pub Association, and so on. Those are definitive and very relevant. And actually, there are your accountants too, because the accountancy websites are really useful. The Visit Britain website is being updated. It wasn't at first, but it's now being updated well. Within the Southwest, though, I would also make sure you sign up. Go on to Southwest Tourism Alliance website and sign up for the newsletter, the e-newsletter, because that is coming out not just with links to latest guidance, but it's also coming out with links to the things that we as an industry are lobbying hard on. And there are great opportunities there to be like me and spend half your working week on calls lobbying people for things and trying to argue on behalf of so many others. And I would certainly sign up for that. It's free. and it's got a circulation of about 8,000 businesses across the southwest, and will keep you really well informed.
And sorry, what was the web address on that one as well?
I knew you'd ask me that. It's if you Google Southwest Tourism Alliance, and I'm sure that your team can put that in the follow-up email.
Yeah. Jamie can put that in the email to everybody. No problem at all. Okay. Well, thank you, Robin. Thank you, guests. Thank you, Sarah. I'd like to sort of wrap it up now. Really, we've sorry we have gone sort of 10 or 11 minutes over. If you haven't yet asked your question, I would say again, you can still do so at events@thomaswestcott.co.uk. As I said before, you will get the recording of the webinar sent to you with that web address. We'll have another webinar next week on a subject to be decided, to look out for that. So all that remains for me to do is to thank you for attending, our attendees. It is nice to know that you're attending in quite large numbers, and even on a sunny day, you're coming out to sort of staying in to see us. And I'd like to especially thank Robin, Sarah and Stuart for the preparation time and for taking their time to come and speak to you today. So have a great weekend, and as always, channeling my inner Ron Burgundy, stay safe, Devon and Somerset. So thank you very much.
Thank you.